All right. In the previous section, I was showing how to do interpolation with motion prediction. So if you have a short sequence animation, perhaps of a spaceship or a fighter plane, that you could see something lasting a little bit longer, doing perhaps turning a 1 second animation into 4 or 5 seconds with a nice motion estimated time stretch. In this one here, I'll cover another thing that also comes up quite often, and that's if you want to composite two animations, such as an animated background like this one, and a animation of your spaceship, or maybe a fighter plane, a dogfight, a chase or something like that. You have a challenge sometimes that you don't have a selection mask anymore. Right? Perhaps you never rendered it with the alpha channel to hold the selection, or perhaps you did some motion estimation, or you some interpolation, or you did some other things like you loaded it into an animation and it loses the alpha channel. So one thing we can do is take a look at how to reconstruct that alpha channel. The goal is to get back to something like this that shows the selection mask essentially, and then to use that when we composite it with a animated background that should not be filling it in all over, but only should show wherever the mask says it's okay. So we'll probably invert the mask to have something like this, and then this animated mask will allow the background to show through wherever it is white, and it will leave it in the foreground image wherever it is black. So you can do a reconstruction, and that's what I wanted to show you here. So we'll start from something like this, and in fact we'll start from even something a little bit shorter than that. This one has 69 frames or 70-ish, something like that. And it's really a looping animation, and I wanted to show also how to do that. Right? It's not a very good animation. It has a little bit of a twitch to it, but still it is something that we can use just to show the point. And the way we started was the same as in the prior demo, where we load a sequence, and this sequence we load the entire image sequence, and it may be longer than what we really need. So that's not necessarily the fastest way or the smartest way to do it. If you know what frames you really need, or if you have just 10 or 20 frames to choose from, this will go a little bit faster. Also, the format that we load or the type of image, just being a PNG doesn't mean necessarily what it is. It could be grayscale 8-bit, it could be 24-bit, it could be 32-bit, 8-bit channel per channel with alpha. So depending on what the situation is, you may get this to load a little bit faster. Here we're going through the conversion service for each frame as we load them. If it were Targa, I think this would load a little bit faster. So sometimes just be patient, or work accordingly. Convert your images to the right format if you know it's going to help you in your workflow. But at any rate, once we have these images, and this will only take a few more seconds, I have a total of 95 frames in this sequence. Again, I only want to work with a short portion of that, perhaps 20 or 15 frames, but then make it a looping one that kind of ping pongs and you don't see it kind of jump. So because right now this is what the animation looks like, and you see that when it reaches the end here, it jumps back to, it's not a perfect loop here. And what I'd like to do is really have it kind of go from here. I like the reflection I see here, or some sort of a reflection in the glass, and I want it to not go too far. So I may want to have it like this, and something like this, kind of wobble back and forth between one and the other. So one thing we need to do obviously is learn how to work with the frames of the animation and eliminate the frames that we don't want. This one here is going to be the end frame of this part that we don't want. So what we need to do is set an in marker and the out marker, the in point and the out point, and then delete that section. Right. So let's say we want to go all the way through here. We'll call that the out marker, and then we'll go all the way to the beginning. We'll say that's the in marker. So we see now the blue highlighted area. That's the selected frames, and we can simply right-click and delete that block. This is a selection of frames that turns into a block. and that block can now be deleted. So we now have fewer frames. We still have a few too many. The ones at the end here we want to get rid of as well. So we want to keep this till about here. So from here we'll mark again as an in point to the end, as an out point. And so we have here again a small group of frames that we will also want to delete. And right click there, delete block. Those frame editing tools, by the way, you see that when you right click on the timeline, you see them also here on the animation frames. That's the same menu here. All right, so now that we have the frames we really care for, it's a good time to perhaps store that. You might want to go back to that. So go to store animation in the animation menu and store to disk. So here it is. And now the next thing is to make it looping, and not by blending away the last couple of frames and blending them over the first couple of frames. That's one thing you can do also, especially if it's a sky background or something that's very noisy to begin with. But this is crisp and we want to keep it that way. I mean, you could do a make loopable and it would ask you how many frames do you want to sacrifice and have blend over the last so many frames to the first frames. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to make it a ping pong, loop it back. So I'm going to need to select the whole thing and then copy that into, select the whole thing as a block, go from the first frame to the end frame. And if we scroll back here, we can see the whole frame sequence now is selected. Right, so we have selected the whole frame. We can now copy that, copy the block, and so what we can do is then later insert it here. But before we do that, we need to reverse one or the other. Now we cannot reverse the order of the ones we copied, but we can reverse the ones that we have here. Right, so here you can right click and select reverse frames. So that now is going in the reverse sequence, and we can go to the first frame and right click and paste or insert block, the one that we had copied before the current frame. Right, so what we just did is we inserted the original block here at the beginning, and it is followed by the reversed block, the animation that's reversed. And that means now it is essentially looping without jumping. I mean, it is a little bit jumping by nature because that's what it had in this frame sequence. But it is an animation that is looping and that we can use for the next set. So let's go and store that. Store to disk. So we have a save copy. Well, not really a fully saved copy. It's not saved to file. Well, it is saved to file, but you don't know where it is, right? It went to somewhere on the hard drive in a temp folder that Dog Waffle maintains. So this, we can always click on that to restore it. And we have this animation now, what is it, about 59, almost 60 frames. All right, so the thing that we want to do then eventually is to create an animation of something else in the background, or maybe we have that already. Maybe you rendered that in your 3D program, or let's create one just very briefly. Filter, animated, starry night, and give it a little bit of a movement, sideways, upwards, downwards, star size, star count, and then the speed. There you go. So with that, maybe a little bit more. There you go, and preview that here in the full screen, and OK that. All right, so we have a little bit of an animation here that we can consider the background and perhaps do all sorts of other things to it, but let's not waste too much time on that. We just need some animation, and we know it has the same number of frames because we rendered it into the animation that we had before. So what we can do is we can store this one as well, store animation to disk, and so now we have our background. That's the one we had here before, right? That's the sky, same idea. This one had 69 frames. Let's see how many this one has. This one has 59. All right, so whatever it is, this one here is the background image we want to use, and it's an image sequence. It's an animation. This one here is our spaceship, and we want to combine the two together. Now, one way to do that is to say, well, let's consider this one the animated swap image. Right? Remember, we have two images. You have the main image, and you can switch over here to the swap buffer or the swap image. That one still shows a sky that we had before. Well, what you can do is you can switch it here and say, let's use this one as the animated swap image. So as you're scrubbing through that, it's pulling the images from here into the swap image. And so now we can combine the two. We can do a few things to combine them. For instance, you can click this in the previews. You can click this preview and to enable layer mixing, but the default is sort of a multiply mode. Right click that and you'll get other modes, but you will not have a mode where it's showing the spaceship in opaque mode. You can see through the spaceship here because it's like in screen mode. It's doing something interesting, and sometimes that's really usable, but it's not what we're looking for in this case. We need the spaceship to remain opaque. And so one thing we will need is a mask that identifies where the spaceship is and where it's not. Where the background is, it should be transparent and actually allow this animation to show through. And where the spaceship is present, regardless of whether it is colored or dark or whatever, you know, or even a transparency might be present there, it should block the star or at least reduce it. For instance, if you had a part that was transparent, made of glass, you might want to see some of the stars, but not at full intensity. So we don't have this mask anymore, and we want to now see if we can reconstruct it. In this tutorial, I want to talk about how to reconstruct a usable mask. Right? It won't necessarily be perfect, especially if some of the colors on this spaceship are the same as the color of the background, because very likely we'll be using the background color to try to identify and isolate it from the rest of it. Pixels coming from the spaceship will have usually a different color. So one way you can do that, how do we isolate that? One way you can do that is to simply change the color or the brightness to the point where everything that is black remains black, and everything that is even slightly off it, just a tiny little bit brighter than total blackness, like very dark gray or just any bright color, that will turn very bright. We want to make them all very bright. And then that way, for instance, you could work with the value filter and see if you adjust the value, if you adjust the contrast or the gamma, maybe you can get to a point where everything is shining really bright on that spaceship, and that's pretty good. Look at that, we have our mask. All right, now it's not going to be perfect, right? But it's going to move so fast, it's not going to matter. So let's not look for perfection. Let's just make it good enough, and apply that in terms of animated across. And now the white part here, it needs to be fully white. And one thing you want to verify is it really as bright as it can be. When you scroll down on the right side here in your sidebar, you can see the info section. And if it's minimized, make sure you open that. Click on info. And in the info section, you'll see what color the cursor sees as you hover over it. So if you go over the white section, you'll see, ooh, it's not at 255. Those values you see in this area, they should show 255, the maximum full brightness white. And so what you can do is you can perhaps adjust, expand the dynamic range and hope that that will do it. Let's see. Still 252. So we need to do something to make this even brighter. We don't want to brighten up the dark part though. That one's black, 000. I don't know if you see that down here. So that one's good, but the bright parts is not fully white yet. So maybe just another pass through the filter again and increase it a little bit more. Or another thing you can do is there's a filter called threshold. And that one you could actually have used right from the beginning. The threshold filter will make it black or white, right? There's no going about it. It's either black or white. The pixels may be very close to white or black, and so depending on where you set it here, you'll start seeing some different regions. But it's easy to make it all white and animate that one. So now here, as you hover over the white areas, indeed you can see in the lower right section here in the info panel, you can see that indeed the white part is, the color is indeed fully white at 255 on each channel, red, green, and blue, hexadecimal value FF on each channel. So that's good, that's what we need. Now let me go back and redo that from the original. There's another way to do the same thing. This one here. Okay, we could actually have done that threshold filter right from the beginning. Threshold like this. So let's see what that does. Okay, somewhere here we'll be able to find everything that is not black turning white, and that's all we need. All right, so that's another way I would recommend to try that. There is another thing you might want to do though, and that's to see, well, maybe it's a little bit too crisp on the edges. See how these pixels are now not anti-aliased or not smoothed. One thing you could do is add a little bit of blur to that, like the simple blur, and don't do too much of that, just a tiny little bit, and then perhaps run that threshold again. Where is it? Run that threshold filter again, and that would allow you to perhaps reduce it a little bit. I didn't do enough of that. Let's go apply the blur a little bit more, simple blur, something like that. Apply that all over the sequence. So now you see all of these edges a little bit blurred, but it's good, it gives you a little bit softer edge. And then if you decide you want to actually trim it and tighten it a little bit around that spaceship, make it a little bit of a more narrow selection, a tighter selection, what you can do is you can go back to color or filter value adjust, for instance, and reset it, and then change the contrast, for instance, here, or the gamma. There, with this you can adjust so that it breathes, expands, or it comes tighten it a little bit, and then with that you'll have perhaps a even crisper, better selection. And that might be particularly useful if you just have too much bleed with the background color on that selection. So anyway, we have a selection that we can use. Let's go store that one. But that one identifies the parts of the spaceship. What we probably want is really the opposite of that. Here's the one we had before. Let me kill this one. What we want is something equivalent to this. So the opposite, or the invert. So all I do is I invert the image, invert it, and of course apply to the whole animation. So every frame is inverted, and that's the one I want to store as an animated selection mask. So here we go, store that to disk. So now we do have an animated selection mask. We have the animation that goes with it. We have the animated selection mask of the actual spaceship, but the one we really want is the rest outside of the spaceship. And so here's the spaceship in this animation. What we do with the selection mask is to say use it as an animated selection. That's what you choose here. You check this box. Now that's selecting the background to do something with. And what we do with it is use this animation as the background by simply keeping it as the animated swap image. So make sure this one is checked here. And now this is the animated swap. This is the mask that will allow the animated swap to be blended in. And this is the image that will remain of the spaceship in the front. So look at it this way. This is the top. This is the foreground image, if you want. This is the foreground. This is a selection mask that will allow some amount of pixels to be replaced by a different image coming from the background. The swap image, you can consider this the background. The foreground is the main animation here, and the selection mask will tell you whether the images come from the foreground or from the background, pixel by pixel. Now, when do you do that? That's simply done by combining the two. Right? You combine with swap whatever is in the swap image, and that happens to be this one. This animation is going to be in the swap image frame for frame. So we'll go to the filter, combine with swap, and rather than using some of these that do some fancy stuff like adding or screen combining or anything like that, rather than doing that, what we'll do is we'll use, let me undo this, we'll use the mix mode, combine with swap mix buffers, where we mix the two buffers, right? The main buffer and the swap buffer. Right? Those two buffers can be mixed one way or another. And what we do is we say we want to favor the we want to favor the spaceship, but we also want to favor the other one. So the two really need to be combined in a way that allows it to be combined, but respecting the selection mask we have here. Right. So what we do is we scrub through that to make sure we see that selection mask. You want to see those selection masks. You want to see the alpha channel. You can also enable the selection here on the overlay alpha. It should turn purple here inside the spaceship, indicating that that one is not allowed to change, is not selected. These pixels are not selected for operation, and that means the rest around it, which still is black, will be allowed. And so if we can now go to that combiner swap mix buffers, now here you have the ability to say, yeah, show me everything coming from the background, right? Left side is show me everything coming from the foreground, from the main image. Right side is show me everything from the swap image, from the background. Somewhere in between you can do two. You can do a blend of the two. But we really want that. However, the alpha channel has been blocking this area, so the background will not override the foreground. That's where the magic is happening. And so now we apply that. Now don't apply it just to this one image. You want to save some time here and simply apply it to all frames. Now for each frame it will go and select the next frame from this mask, select the next frame from this for the background, and advance to this frame here as well. So it does that frame for frame in parallel and combines the two back together. Then you can go and clear this. You can clear make sure you uncheck the selection mask here. You don't want this to be used as a selection mask anymore. And now you have the spaceship flying over this combined background. Now that's one way to do it. It's not the only way, but I think it's a fairly intuitive way when you do this one or two times, if you think about working with those different resources all together. Right? You have the color channels, you have the selection mask that you reconstructed, or maybe you actually had that selection mask already in a separate image sequence. Right? If you use Carrara, if you use Lightwave, if you use many of the 3D programs, you can render the alpha channel in a separate image sequence from the ones that you use for the red, green, blue values. So the RGB, the color image, may be in a separate PNG image sequence file or image file sequence from different from the alpha sequence. And in that case, it makes it even easier because you can load one into representing the RGB, the colors, and you can load the other animation and store that directly for the alpha mask. But if you don't have that, that's what this tutorial was going to show you. You can reconstruct it. And then, of course, at that point, you could still go back to doing some frame blending or do some interpolation of something else, maybe do some motion interpolation of that. But that's what we saw in the prior tutorial. Thanks for watching. This is going to be certainly an important step to master how to combine multiple image sequences. And I want to get your attention also to finish. I want to take your attention to compositive swap, because that's another way to do it. If you have compositing that you want to do based on a green screen or blue screen, or actually any color screen that you have in the frames of the main animation. So you could actually you don't have to use necessarily the alpha channel or selection mask, but certainly I think the selection mask approach is the more popular way to do this. So what else is there? We've seen there are plenty of other tutorials on this topic, by the way. I'm not going to repeat too much of this. I just want to kind of refresh a few things. When you look at the timeline, there is actually also a whole compositing by image sequence, right? So the same thing here that you see mix buffers, you can see the same thing here too. And in fact, you can even adjust and keyframe the amount of mixing, right? So that's another thing that's also really powerful. And you could, for instance, have it go and sort of disappear in darkness here, do a little transition. That's one thing you can do, but more than combining the main image with the swap image, you can also do a composite with the swap image, or composite with a sequence, and that's the image sequence. So that's really the one the professionals will probably want to use, so you're done by yesterday, right? You want to do this really quick. If you have your image sequence already with alpha compositing, you can do that directly from an image sequence here. And that's the topic of another tutorial, but the next one will be starting to look at, well, how to combine really sort of our fly through. We have a terrain we want to fly through, we have a spaceship that's chasing maybe another spaceship, maybe there's a whole flotilla of them flying across, they're all kind of flying in the same direction, and we want them to be flying over or through our terrain that we create in 3D Designer. And that's the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.